We had our very first one, which was simply a general approach to teaching the Bible. We used a psalm to learn that, but essentially we're gaining the general principles of teaching the Bible. And then in our second session, we spent time in the narrative part of the Old Testament, so that we can see how we can learn to teach from the Old Testament, but to teach from narrative parts. The main point that we were seeking to achieve is to achieve the maximum exposure of teaching from the Old Testament. So for instance, if you can go to your table of contents briefly in your Bible, if you've got your Bible and you go to your table of contents, or if you've got an electronic one, just click at the top so that you see all the books of the Bible. I want us to notice that generally speaking, the narratives cover Genesis all the way to Esther. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 books are covered by the narratives. Now, within Exodus and Deuteronomy, you have what is called the law. Okay, so Exodus has the law itself, and then Deuteronomy, which simply means second law or a repeat of the law. You have the law of Moses, and that has a slightly different approach from the narratives, because it is a collection of laws. So it becomes a little bit like the book of Proverbs, where you have those little verses of different proverbs. So the law of Moses can be a little bit like that. So we did not deal with how to handle those specific laws. Then from Job all the way to Song of Solomon, you have poetry. And in a sense, that's what we did when we handled the book of Psalms, when we were learning the general principles of teaching from the Bible. In other words, we can now say Job, Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon has been covered. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So an extra 5 books we covered when we were dealing with the general approach. Then from Isaiah all the way to Malachi is prophecy. Strictly speaking, we haven't handled prophecy. But because most of prophecy is in poetic form, we have covered the basic principles there as well. Okay, so there's quite a bit of prophecy that is in narrative form. Again, we have covered narrative. So all I'm trying to say there is that in the last 2 sessions, simply by the samples that we handled, we actually covered, in the short time we have, the entire Old Testament. We did. We would, assuming we had an extra 2 to 3 sessions, we would have said, okay, now let's major on the law, let's major on prophecy, because there are certain aspects that are unique. Today, we are in the New Testament. And the New Testament comprises 3 types of literature. first of all, you've got narrative, which comprises the Gospels and Acts. It's narrative. The Gospels are a little unique in the sense that they are a mixture of narrative and what in theological terms we say didactic passages, which is simply teaching passages. There's a combination, because what you have in the Gospels is Jesus going here and there teaching. So you have quite a bit of sermonic material in the Gospels. And the exercise that we will do in a few minutes, because I'll be making you break up into groups, is going to use the narrative approach, but because Jesus will be teaching, you will stray a little bit into the teaching. The book of Acts is also very much like that. You have the apostles beginning to preach, but they go to this town, they teach, they go to that town, they teach, and so on. So you have, again, quite a bit of the combination there as well. But Acts is essentially narrative. Then beyond Acts, you have the main work we are going to do today, which is the epistles, okay, the teaching passages. The epistles have very little narrative, very little. It is simply, this is what you need to believe, and therefore this is how you should live. And that's what I want us to spend the rest of our time considering today. So what will happen is that I am going to stretch you this morning by giving you a narrative from the Gospels, but you're going to use the principles that you used last week on the narratives in the Old Testament. Okay, so I had a passage, but my preference would be that when you go into your groups, you say, okay, let's use Pastor Mbewe's, or let's use this one instead. I think this one is better. All right. Any narrative section, because you've now learned. They normally begin by saying something like, okay, let me take you to the one I wanted you to look at, which is Luke 14. Luke 14. They normally begin with things like, and as he was going along, or in the meantime, this was happening, or the little phrase, now. In fact, the one we are looking at begins with now, the one I'm recommending. Now, verse 25 of Luke 14. Now. So you can tell it's a new story is beginning. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, there comes in the teaching. That's the way in which the Gospels tend to function. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, he goes on to teach and so on. And he ends with verse 3. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. So there's a great crowd coming. Jesus turns around and basically says, sorry guys, I'm not a politician here. I'm not trying to get your votes. In fact, I want to reduce your number. And this is what it's going to cost you to be my followers. And then that's what is happening here. Okay, so you can either take that, or you can say, look, there's, this one which I like. Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. So I think let's look at this one instead, because we have learned that you have the setting and then the swinging up, your crisis and resolution. You will more or less find that that's what is happening here, especially in John. Because in John, that's what happened. Jesus is doing something, the Pharisees are unhappy, they begin to mount pressure on him. Then Jesus says something right at the top that dissolves the whole situation. Okay, so I want you to attempt that kind of exercise. And then, when I get back, well, even before, there is a break time. Mr. Chingambo will tell you when it's break time, you get your goodies, you come back into your groups. But at a certain point, I will want us to report back so that we need to see, did what we learned last week sink in when now we do the Gospels? Because the Gospels, I want to repeat, are like that. So you choose. If you want, you can use mine. But if you've got a better one that you were preaching on last week or teaching in Sunday school last week or whatever, please feel free to use it. And then once we've done the report, we go into the letters. The last part of the New Testament is what is called the phrase that is coming to my mind is wrong. I'm having the word apocrypha, which is not the word I want. It is the book of Revelation. I'll tell you the right word in a moment. So that is unique literature altogether. Okay, and it's important that we treat it separate. It is like the book of Daniel, but the second part of the book of Daniel. Thank you very much. Apocalyptic. There we are. Apocalyptic literature. Okay, so it prophesies the future, but in imagery, in such a way that the actual teaching is hidden unless you are familiar with the general Old Testament. Thank you very much. So that's the third, which we won't touch, okay, because we just don't have the time. Just as we did not handle prophecy on its own and we did not handle law on its own. Okay, anything that I need to clarify before I separate you into groups? So you find a section that is a narrative in the Gospels, and you prepare a lesson using the approach that we had before. Okay? You've got the words, you reduce it to the skeleton, you reduce it to this is the one thing that the whole passage is teaching, and then from there, you transition it into the one message that you would teach, and then this is the breakdown of the message, and then you save you save Thank you very much. Somebody, who was that? Thank you very much. Thank you. So you will be in two different groups, right? Because you seem to remember what we have done. Okay, you save a point. Yeah.